You believe people are fundamentally good, that trust and kindness will eventually be rewarded in your relationships and career. Every day you extend faith to colleagues, friends, and partners, only to discover they've prioritized their own interests over your shared commitments, leaving you feeling naive and betrayed. I am Niccolò Machiavelli, the political philosopher who spent years observing the naked truth of human behavior in the courts of Renaissance Italy. Through my service to the Florentine Republic and my analysis of history's greatest leaders, I uncovered the uncomfortable realities about human nature that most people refuse to acknowledge. What I discovered about the true nature of humanity will shatter your illusions, but arm you with the knowledge to navigate relationships, politics, and power with clear eyes. The same insights that guided princes and politicians for over 500 years can protect you from manipulation, while helping you understand the hidden motivations driving every human interaction. But first, like this video, subscribe for more uncomfortable truths, and comment below where you're watching from. Want to know which corner of the world is ready to see humanity as it truly is? I hold in my hands the diplomatic seal that once represented everything I believed about human nature. Small bronze disc that bore the authority of the Florentine Republic and my faith in honorable conduct among civilized men. When I first received this seal at 29, I believed I was entering a world where intelligence, virtue, and dedication would be rewarded, where treaties meant something, and where a man's word carried the weight of his character. My early diplomatic missions filled me with excitement and purpose. I traveled to the court of Louis XII in France, believing that reason and mutual benefit would guide our negotiations. I prepared meticulously, studying every detail of Florentine interests, convinced that presenting the truth clearly would lead to favorable outcomes. I thought diplomacy was about finding solutions that honored all parties. How naive I was. In that French court, I watched ambassadors smile warmly while plotting their counterparts' destruction. I saw treaties signed with elaborate ceremony, only to be violated before the ink dried. Men who embraced me as brothers at dinner were writing reports that evening recommending Florence's subjugation. The shock of discovery was profound. I remember sitting in my chambers after my first major negotiation, realizing that while I had been arguing for justice and mutual prosperity, my counterparts had been calculating Florence's weaknesses and planning exploitation. They viewed my honesty not as virtue, but as stupidity, a tactical disadvantage they could manipulate. That diplomatic seal became my education in human nature's true face. I learned that people say what serves their immediate interests, not what they believe. I discovered that loyalty lasts exactly as long as it's profitable. I witnessed how quickly alliance turns to betrayal when circumstances shift. The most painful lesson came when I realized that my own republic's representatives played the same games. Florentine nobles I respected were making secret deals that contradicted our public positions. Men I admired for their virtue were calculating their personal advantages while speaking of Florence's glory. This seal taught me that the world operates on hidden agendas, not noble principles. Every smile masks a calculation. Every promise contains an escape clause. Every alliance includes plans for inevitable betrayal. I was learning to see the machinery of self-interest that drives all human interaction, and it was grinding my idealistic beliefs into dust. The document that destroyed my world was elegantly written on fine parchment, its formal language masking the brutal reality of power's return. The Medici Restoration Decree dissolved the Republic. I had served faithfully for 14 years and ended my political career with the stroke of a pen. But more than ending my employment, it taught me that justice, merit, and loyalty mean nothing when raw power shifts hands. When the Medici returned to Florence in 1512, I witnessed the speed with which principles evaporate under pressure. Men who had sworn sacred oaths to the Republic suddenly discovered compelling reasons to support the very family they had helped exile. Colleagues who had worked beside me for years crossed the street to avoid association with the fallen regime. I was arrested on charges of conspiracy against the New Order. Accusations I knew were false, but truth had become irrelevant. In the Bargello prison, I experienced torture designed to extract confessions that would justify predetermined punishments. The physical pain was excruciating, but the psychological revelation was worse. I was witnessing how easily human society discards its own rules when convenient. During those dark hours hanging from the strappado, I understood that the legal systems we revere are merely tools in the hands of whoever holds power. The same laws that once protected me now condemned me. The same institutions I had served faithfully now sought my destruction. Justice was revealed as a luxury available only to those who control the apparatus of enforcement. My fellow citizens demonstrated the remarkable human capacity for moral flexibility. Former supporters of the Republic discovered they had always harbored doubts about democratic governance. Men who had praised my diplomatic service suddenly remembered occasions when I had seemed unreliable. The swiftness of their conversion was breathtaking. When I was finally released, more through luck than justice, I found myself completely isolated. My property was confiscated, my career destroyed, my reputation poisoned by association with the failed Republic. Friends who had enjoyed my hospitality when I held office now found pressing engagements whenever I approached. This experience crystallized a fundamental truth about human nature. Loyalty is a transaction, not a virtue. People are loyal when loyalty serves their interests, and disloyal when circumstances change. The Medici document didn't just restore a family to power, it revealed how quickly human bonds dissolve under pressure. I learned that expecting gratitude for past service is foolish. My years of competent diplomatic work meant nothing to citizens concerned about their current safety under new rulers. Merit becomes liability when associated with fallen powers. Excellence in service to the wrong cause becomes evidence of dangerous judgment. The Restoration taught me that human societies operate on fear, not principle. Citizens didn't support the Medici because they preferred monarchy. They supported whoever could provide stability and punish opposition. The Republic fell not because its ideas were wrong, but because it couldn't protect its supporters from consequences. The rough wool cloak I wore during my exile to Sant'Andrea represents the most valuable education of my life, though I didn't recognize it at the time. This peasant's garment replaced the fine silks of diplomatic service, forcing me to see the world from a perspective I had never imagined. Exile stripped away everything I thought defined me, leaving only the essential question: what remains when power, position, and social connections disappear? My small farm outside Florence became a laboratory for understanding human nature, starting with my own. Without the elaborate machinery of political life to distract me, I confronted the uncomfortable reality of who I was when nobody was watching. The man who had counseled diplomats and influenced policy was now concerned with crop yields and chicken coops. The transformation was humiliating and illuminating. In this isolation, I began to see patterns that had been invisible during my years. In power, my neighbors, simple farmers, and tradesmen displayed the same fundamental behaviors I had observed in princes and ambassadors. They formed alliances based on mutual benefit, betrayed trust when profitable, and adapted their loyalties to changing circumstances. Human nature operated identically at every social level. The peasant's cloak taught me that proximity to power hadn't made me special, it had made me blind. While wearing fine clothes and attending important meetings, I had mistaken the theater of politics for its reality. I had focused on what people said rather than what they consistently did. Exile forced me to observe behavior without the distraction of ceremonial importance. During long evening hours, I began writing observations about the patterns I was discovering. Without access to court libraries or scholarly debate, I relied on memory and direct experience. This limitation proved liberating. I stopped trying to reconcile reality with philosophical ideals and started describing what actually happened when humans interacted. The isolation revealed how much of my previous identity had depended on others' validation. In the political world, I had been somebody because others recognized my position. On the farm, I was nobody special, which allowed me to see everybody clearly. The emotional pain of this recognition gradually transformed into intellectual clarity. Realized that my political career had been spent managing appearances rather than understanding realities. I had crafted speeches about honor while observing dishonorable behavior. I had negotiated treaties while knowing they would be broken. I had participated in a system of mutual deception while believing I was serving truth. The peasant's cloak became a symbol of honesty, the diplomatic honesty that revealed only what served purpose, but the brutal honesty that acknowledges what people actually are, rather than what they claim to be. Wearing humble wool instead of decorated silk taught me that human nature doesn't change with clothing, title, or social position. This forced perspective shift prepared me to see the human species as it truly exists, rather than as I had been trained to perceive it through the lens of civilization's flattering myths. The exile that destroyed my career created the conditions for insights that would prove far more valuable than any diplomatic success. My rustic education was beginning, and it would teach me truths about human nature that no university or court could provide. The worn copy of Livy's histories that sustained me through exile became my most treasured possession, not for its monetary value, but for its revelation that human nature has remained constant across millennia. Each evening, after my day's work on the farm, I would change from my peasant's clothing into my finest remaining garments and enter into conversation with the ancient world's greatest minds. These imaginary dialogues taught me that the behaviors I had witnessed in Renaissance Italy were identical to those recorded in ancient Rome. Reading Livy's accounts of Roman politics, I discovered that the same patterns of ambition, betrayal, and power-seeking had repeated themselves for centuries. The names and costumes changed, but the fundamental drives remained identical. Romans pursued self-interest with the same calculation as modern Italians. They formed alliances for advantage, broke promises for profit, and abandoned principles for survival. In these ancient texts, I found confirmation that my disillusionment wasn't based on the particular corruption of my irrit, was based on recognizing universal human characteristics that every generation prefers to ignore. Caesar's supporters abandoned republican principles not because they were uniquely unprincipled, but because humans consistently choose personal safety over abstract ideals. When forced to choose, Tacitus revealed how even the most virtuous emperors struggled with the corrupting effects of absolute power. Augustus, praised for bringing peace and prosperity, had achieved these goods through methods that included assassination, betrayal, and the systematic elimination of opposition. The results were admirable, but the methods revealed the uncomfortable truth that good outcomes often require morally questionable actions. These evening conversations with ancient authors taught me that every generation believes it has progressed beyond the crude behaviors of its ancestors, while simultaneously demonstrating identical patterns. The Romans thought themselves more civilized than the Greeks. The Greeks considered themselves superior to the barbarians. Each culture believed it had transcended the base motivations that drove inferior peoples. I began to understand that civilization doesn't change human nature, it merely provides more sophisticated methods for expressing the same fundamental drives. Ancient Romans pursued wealth, power, and status through warfare and conquest. Modern Italians pursued identical goals through banking, diplomacy, and trade. The tools evolved, but the motivations remained constant. Plutarch's biographies demonstrated how great leaders succeeded by understanding and working with human nature rather than trying to reform it. Alexander conquered not by appealing to moral principles, but by understanding what motivated his soldiers and enemies. He used fear, greed, loyalty, and ambition as tools for achieving his objectives. The historical record revealed that societies thrive when the institutions account for human selfishness rather than depending on human virtue. The Roman Republic succeeded for centuries because its system assumed that ambitious men would pursue personal power and created mechanisms to channel that ambition toward public benefit. It failed when idealists tried to operate as if men were naturally virtuous. Through these ancient voices, I learned that accepting human nature isn't cynical, it's realistic. The greatest leaders, legislators, and philosophers had recognized that humans are driven by self-interest and designed their systems accordingly. They succeeded by harnessing natural drives rather than fighting them. This literary education prepared me to write about politics and human nature with the authority of both personal experience and historical perspective. The Library of Truth taught me that my observations weren't unique insights, they were rediscoveries of knowledge that every wise person eventually learns. The jeweled dagger that belonged to Caesar Borgia represents the perfect synthesis of charm and ruthlessness that I studied in history's most effective leaders. This weapon was beautiful enough to display at court ceremonies, yet sharp enough to eliminate enemies, a physical metaphor for the dual nature required for successful leadership. Borgia carried it while charming allies and used it to destroy threats, teaching me that effective power requires both attraction and fear. During my diplomatic encounters with Cesare, I witnessed leadership that worked precisely because it ignored conventional morality in favor of practical results. He could inspire fierce loyalty among his followers while systematically eliminating rivals. His methods were brutal, but his effectiveness was undeniable. While moral leaders struggled to maintain authority, Borgia conquered territories and built lasting alliances through calculated use of both reward and punishment. I watched him manage subordinates with masterful psychology. He rewarded loyalty generously, making service to him genuinely profitable for his supporters. But he also demonstrated the consequences of betrayal so dramatically that treachery became unthinkable. His followers weren't motivated by abstract principles, they were motivated by clear understanding of benefits and costs. Borgia's genius lay in understanding that humans need both hope and fear to remain loyal. Hope alone makes people complacent and demanding. Fear alone makes them resentful and rebellious. But the combination of generous rewards for loyalty and swift punishment for betrayal creates stable authority that people accept rather than resist. His treatment of conquered territories revealed sophisticated understanding of human nature. Rather than ruling through pure oppression, he identified local grievances and positioned himself as the solution to problems created by previous rulers. People welcomed him not because they loved him, but because he offered concrete improvements to their circumstances. I observed how he managed his reputation through controlled demonstrations of both mercy and severity. When he needed to establish authority in a new region, he would appoint a harsh governor to impose order, then remove that governor and institute more moderate policies. The population would credit him with bringing relief, even though he had created the original oppression. The dagger symbolizes his understanding that violence must be decisive and purposeful rather than random and emotional. When Borgia eliminated enemies, he did so completely and efficiently, removing threats rather than creating martyrs. His violence served clear strategic purposes rather than personal satisfaction. Most importantly, I learned from Borgia that effective leadership requires emotional detachment from moral squeamishness. He could order executions without hatred and grant mercy without sentimentality. His decisions were based on strategic calculation rather than personal feeling. This emotional discipline allowed him to make difficult choices that more passionate leaders would avoid. Borgia's career demonstrated that moral flexibility isn't character weakness, it's leadership necessity. A leader who cannot adapt his methods to changing circumstances will be destroyed by more flexible competitors. Rigid adherence to principles becomes a luxury that successful leaders cannot afford. His eventual downfall came not from moral failings, but from circumstances beyond his control, his father's death and his own illness at a critical moment. Even then, his systems were so well designed that they nearly survived his absence. This taught me that effective leadership creates institutions that can function independently of the leader's personal presence. The jeweled dagger represents the uncomfortable truth that good results often require morally questionable methods. Borgia brought order, prosperity, and security to regions that had suffered chaos under previous rulers. His subjects lived better lives under his authority than under more virtuous leaders who couldn't maintain control. The ornate Venetian carnival mask I acquired during my diplomatic travels became a powerful symbol of the most important lesson about human behavior. Successful people master the art of appearing virtuous while acting pragmatically. This golden mask, beautiful and elaborate on the surface while concealing the wearer's true face, represents how the most effective individuals in any society manage public perception while pursuing private interests. In Venice, I observed merchants who built reputations for honest dealing while employing every legal advantage to maximize profits. They understood that appearing trustworthy was essential for business success, so they carefully cultivated images of integrity while negotiating ruthlessly behind closed doors. Their virtue was performative rather than genuine, but it served both their interests and their customers' needs. The mask taught me that moral appearance often matters more than moral reality in human relationships. People judge others based on visible actions and public statements rather than hidden motivations or private thoughts. A leader who appears virtuous while acting pragmatically will be more successful than one who is genuinely virtuous but appears weak or indecisive. Learned to distinguish between being good and appearing good, two entirely different skills that often require contradictory behaviors. Being genuinely good means acting according to moral principles regardless of consequences. Appearing good means understanding what behaviors others interpret as virtuous and performing those behaviors strategically. The most successful people I studied were masters of this performance. They attended church regularly, spoke eloquently about justice and honor, and made public displays of charity, not necessarily because they believed in these principles, but because they understood the social benefits of appearing to believe in them. Their virtue was calculated rather than spontaneous. This insight revolutionized my understanding of political and social success. I realized that moral leaders often fail not because their principles are wrong, but because they refuse to manage appearances effectively. They assume that genuine virtue will be recognized and rewarded, while their more sophisticated competitors understand that virtue must be marketed to be effective. The mask revealed why honest people often lose to manipulative ones in competition. For leadership positions, honest people say what they think and do what they believe. Manipulative people say what others want to hear and do what achieves their objectives. In most human contexts, the second approach produces better short-term results. However, I also learned that successful virtue masking requires genuine skill and intelligence. Maintaining consistent appearances while pursuing pragmatic goals demands sophisticated understanding of human psychology and social dynamics. Successful performers study their audiences carefully and adapt their presentations accordingly. The carnival mask taught me that moral flexibility isn't necessarily moral corruption. Sometimes appearing virtuous while acting pragmatically serves everyone's interests, better than rigid adherence to principles that produce poor outcomes. A leader who maintains the appearance of justice while making necessary compromises may serve society better than one who maintains perfect principles while losing the ability to govern effectively. I discovered that the most effective approach combines genuine moral conviction with strategic flexibility about methods. The mask protects core principles while allowing tactical adaptations to circumstances. This approach preserves integrity while enabling effectiveness in imperfect situations. Understanding the performance aspect of virtue also taught me to evaluate others more accurately. Instead of taking moral claims at face value, I learned to observe patterns of behavior over time. The gap between public virtue and private action reveals character more clearly than either element alone. The bronze medallion depicting a lion and fox that I carried throughout my later years represents the dual nature that effective leaders must embody: the strength to inspire fear when necessary and the cunning to earn affection when possible. This ancient symbol taught me one of the most controversial yet essential truths about human motivation. It is better to be feared than loved. If you cannot be both, because fear is reliable while love is conditional. Through my observations of countless leaders, I discovered that love-based authority is fundamentally unstable because love is selfish and changeable. People love leaders who benefit them personally, but withdraw that love immediately when circumstances change. A leader who depends on affection will find that popularity evaporates the moment difficult decisions must be made or benefits must be reduced. Fear, by contrast, operates through consistent psychological mechanisms that transcend personal feelings. People fear consequences that they understand will follow specific behaviors. Unlike love, which requires constant reinforcement and gratification, fear maintains its effectiveness through reputation and occasional demonstration. A leader known for swift punishment of betrayal rarely needs to actually punish anyone. I observed that the most stable organizations and societies operate on fear-based systems disguised as love-based ones. Successful parents, teachers, employers, and rulers all establish clear consequences for unacceptable behavior, while simultaneously offering rewards for compliance. The fear of punishment motivates consistency more reliably than the hope of reward. The lion represents the strength necessary to establish credible consequences. Without the ability to impose real costs for betrayal or incompetence, a leader cannot maintain authority when challenged. But the fox represents the intelligence needed to use fear strategically rather than brutally. Random or excessive punishment creates resentment and rebellion rather than respect and compliance. My study of history revealed that beloved leaders often presided over declining institutions, while feared leaders built lasting ones. Marcus Aurelius was universally loved, but left Rome weaker than he found it. Augustus was feared throughout his reign, but created an empire that lasted centuries. Love feels better, but fear works better for achieving sustained results. The medallion taught me that combining fear and love requires sophisticated understanding of human psychology. Effective leaders inspire affection through competence, fairness, and occasional generosity, while maintaining credible threats for those who violate trust or undermine authority. They are loved by those who serve them well and feared by those who consider betrayal. I learned that fear must be based on justice rather than caprice to be effective long-term. People accept punishment that they understand and believe they deserved. They rebel against arbitrary persecution that seems motivated by personal malice rather than institutional necessity. Fear-based authority succeeds when it appears systematic rather than emotional. The most important insight was that fear and love are not opposites. They are complementary tools for managing human behavior. Love motivates people to exceed minimum requirements and contribute creativity and initiative. Fear ensures that minimum standards are maintained and boundaries are respected. Effective leaders use both tools appropriately rather than depending exclusively on either. Understanding these dynamics allowed me to navigate relationships more successfully. I learned to establish clear boundaries and consequences early in relationships, making my expectations known before problems developed. This prevented misunderstandings and reduced the need for actual punishment. The lion and fox medallion represents the practical wisdom that successful leadership requires both strength and intelligence, both attraction and deterrence. Leaders who try to rely exclusively on either love or fear will eventually fail when circumstances require the tool they haven't developed. The broken promise ring in my possession tells the story of humanity's most painful characteristic, the inevitable abandonment of those who help us once their assistance is no longer needed. This simple band of tarnished silver once symbolized eternal loyalty between two allies, but it shattered the day I found it convenient to betray the other. It represents every broken promise, every forgotten favor, and every benefactor discarded when circumstances changed. Throughout my political career, I witnessed countless examples of ingratitude that initially shocked me before I understood them as natural human behavior. I watched men who owed their positions entirely to powerful patrons turn against those same benefactors the moment independence became possible. I observed families abandon relatives who had sacrificed for their advancement. I saw republics overthrow leaders who had served them faithfully for decades. The psychological mechanism behind ingratitude is simple yet profound. Humans naturally resent those who place them in positions of dependency. Receiving help creates an emotional debt that feels uncomfortable and limiting. People prefer to believe their success comes from personal merit rather than external assistance. Acknowledging ongoing gratitude requires accepting permanent subordination. To those who helped us, I learned that ingratitude often increases with the magnitude of the favor received. Small kindnesses might be remembered fondly, but life-changing assistance creates psychological burdens that recipients desperately want to escape. The person who saves your career becomes a permanent reminder of your weakness. The friend who rescues you from disaster becomes evidence of your incompetence. This broken ring taught me why expecting gratitude is not only futile but actively dangerous. When you help someone while anticipating future appreciation, you create expectations that will inevitably be disappointed. Worse, you may make decisions based on anticipated gratitude that will never materialize, leaving yourself vulnerable to those you intended to benefit. The most painful examples I witnessed involved parents and children. Parents who sacrificed everything for their children's advancement often discovered that success made their offspring ashamed of humble origins. Children who achieved high positions frequently distanced themselves from families who reminded others of their modest backgrounds. The greater the sacrifice, the greater the eventual rejection. I observed that ingratitude often involves active hostility rather than mere forgetfulness. People don't simply fail to appreciate their benefactors, they frequently develop genuine resentment toward them. The psychological discomfort of owing someone becomes anger at being made to feel indebted. Gratitude transforms into grievance through emotional alchemy that protects self-image. Understanding this pattern revolutionized my approach to helping others. I learned to give assistance without creating dependency or obligation. When possible, I helped people in ways that allowed them to claim personal credit for their success. This approach produced better results because it worked with human psychology rather than against it. The broken ring also taught me to recognize the warning signs of impending ingratitude. People begin distancing themselves from benefactors through small slights and minor disagreements. They start rewriting history to minimize the help they received and emphasize their personal contributions. They seek validation from new sources that don't remind them of past dependency. Most importantly, I learned that ingratitude isn't a character flaw, a natural human response to psychological pressure. Understanding this allows for strategic generosity that benefits both giver and receiver. Help others in ways that enhance their dignity rather than creating obligation. Structure assistance so that recipients can feel proud of their achievements rather than ashamed of their dependence. The lesson of the broken promise ring is not to avoid helping others, but to help them wisely. Give because giving serves your interests or principles, not because you expect gratitude. Structure your generosity to minimize resentment and maximize genuine benefit. Accept ingratitude as natural rather than taking it personally. The merchant's scale that sits on my desk serves as a constant reminder that humans instinctively weigh their personal interests against all other considerations in every decision they make. This brass instrument, designed to measure the exact value of goods in trade, represents the calculating mechanism that operates in every human mind when evaluating relationships, opportunities, and obligations. Even our most seemingly altruistic actions serve hidden self-interests that we often don't acknowledge to ourselves. Through decades of observing human behavior, I discovered that self-interest isn't moral failing, it's biological programming that ensures survival. Every creature on Earth prioritizes its own survival and advancement over the welfare of others. Humans are unique only in our ability to disguise this natural drive behind elaborate moral justifications and social conventions. The scale taught me to look beyond what people claim motivates them and examine what actually drives their choices. A merchant who speaks eloquently about fair trade still adjusts his prices based on market conditions rather than moral principles. A politician who campaigns on serving the public good still makes decisions that enhance his personal power and security. A parent who claims to sacrifice everything for children still expects those children to provide emotional satisfaction and social status in return. I learned that even apparent altruism serves self-interest when examined closely. People give to charity because it makes them feel virtuous and gains social approval. They help friends because it strengthens relationships that may prove useful later. They volunteer for causes because it provides purpose, community, and identity. The benefit to others is real, but it's secondary to the psychological rewards gained by the giver. Understanding self-interest as natural law transformed my ability to predict and influence human behavior. Instead of being disappointed when people acted selfishly, I learned to anticipate self-interested choices and structure situations so that others' self-interest aligned with my objectives. This approach proved far more effective than appealing to moral principles or expecting sacrificial behavior. The merchant's scale revealed why moral systems that ignore self-interest inevitably fail. Utopian societies collapse because they demand behavior that contradicts human nature. Successful societies harness self-interest through laws, incentives, and institutions that channel personal ambition toward public benefit. They work with human nature rather than against it. I observed that the most effective leaders understand and accept the self-interested motivations of their followers. They create systems where serving the leader's interests also serves the followers' interests. They make loyalty profitable and betrayal costly. They appeal to what people actually want rather than what moralists think they should want. This insight explained why idealistic movements often produce cynical outcomes. Revolutions begun with noble principles create new forms of oppression because they fail to account for the self-interested behavior of revolutionary leaders. Religious movements founded on spiritual principles become corrupt institutions because they ignore the material ambitions of their members. The scale taught me that acknowledging self-interest isn't cynical, it's realistic. People can act generously and compassionately while still being fundamentally motivated by personal benefit. The mother who sacrifices for her children gains emotional fulfillment and social purpose. The soldier who risks his life for comrades gains honor and belonging. The citizen who obeys laws gains security and social acceptance. Most importantly, I learned that self-interest doesn't preclude cooperation or genuine affection. People form lasting relationships because they benefit from them. They create stable societies because they're better off living with others than alone. They develop moral systems because shared rules serve everyone's long-term interests. Self-interest motivates the creation of civilization rather than preventing it. The merchant scale represents the wisdom of accepting human nature as it exists rather than demanding it conform to idealistic expectations. When you understand that everyone is constantly weighing personal costs and benefits, you can structure interactions that produce mutual satisfaction rather than disappointment and conflict. The golden chains that once bound a prisoner in the Bargello represent the most seductive form of enslavement dependency that appears beneficial to those who accept it. These chains were beautiful, crafted from precious metal rather than crude iron, but they were still chains. They symbolize how people voluntarily surrender their freedom in exchange for security, comfort, or advantage, not realizing that dependency inevitably corrupts both the giver and receiver. During my years in politics, I witnessed countless examples of how dependency destroys character and relationships. Ambitious young men attach themselves to powerful patrons, trading their independence for advancement opportunities. Initially, both parties benefited from these arrangements. The patron gained loyal servants, while the dependents gained access to resources and positions they couldn't achieve alone. But I observed how these relationships inevitably soured as dependency created resentment and corruption. The dependent person began to feel humiliated by his subordinate position, even though he had chosen it voluntarily. The patron began to feel burdened by obligations to someone who contributed less than he consumed. What started as mutual benefit became mutual exploitation. The golden chains taught me that dependency corrupts the dependent by destroying their initiative and self-respect. When someone else provides for your needs, you gradually lose the skills and motivation necessary for self-sufficiency. You become comfortable with subordination and afraid of independence. Your abilities atrophy from disuse, making genuine independence increasingly impossible. I watched talented men become parasites through dependency relationships that started as temporary arrangements. They intended to use patron support to build independent careers, but instead became permanent appendages who feared risking their security by asserting autonomy. The golden chains became so comfortable that breaking free seemed more frightening than remaining bound. Dependency also corrupts the provider by encouraging arrogance and exhortation. People who support others begin to feel entitled to control their dependents' lives. They make increasingly unreasonable demands, knowing that their dependents cannot afford to refuse. They use their support as leverage to extract compliance, loyalty, and deference that wouldn't be given freely. The most insidious aspect of dependency is how it masquerades as kindness and generosity. Patrons convince themselves they're helping others, while actually creating obligations that serve their own interests. Dependents convince themselves they're grateful rather than resentful. Both parties participate in elaborate self-deception that conceals the power dynamics involved. I learned that dependency relationships inevitably become unstable because they violate human dignity. People need to feel capable and autonomous to maintain self-respect. When circumstances force them into permanent subordination, they either become resentful or lose their spirit entirely. Neither outcome serves anyone's long-term interests. The golden chains revealed why successful societies minimize dependency rather than institutionalizing it. Systems that create permanent classes of dependence produce social instability and economic inefficiency. People perform better when they have opportunities for advancement and independence, rather than guaranteed security that requires submission. Observe that the strongest relationships involve mutual interdependence, rather than one-sided dependency. When both parties bring value to the relationship and maintain alternatives, they treat each other with respect and consideration. When one party becomes completely dependent on the other, the relationship becomes exploitative regardless of original intentions. Understanding dependencies' corrupting effects changed my approach to both giving and receiving help. I learned to structure assistance in ways that enhanced others' independence rather than creating obligation. When I needed help, I sought arrangements that preserved my autonomy and provided value to those who assisted me. The lesson of the golden chains is that freedom requires accepting responsibility for your own welfare. Security that comes at the cost of independence ultimately provides neither security nor dignity. True strength comes from developing capabilities that make you valuable to others rather than dependent on them. The two-faced coin I acquired from a Florentine banker perfectly captures the performative nature of most human relationships. One side displays friendship and affection, while the other reveals calculation and competition. This ancient silver piece, worn smooth by countless transactions, represents how people simultaneously maintain appearances of mutual support while secretly evaluating advantages and planning strategic moves against those same friends. Throughout my career, I discovered that proximity breeds competition more reliably than affection. Colleagues who work closely together inevitably compare their achievements, compensation, and recognition. Friends who share similar ambitions cannot help but measure their progress against each other. Family members who should naturally support each other often develop the most intense rivalries because they know each other's weaknesses intimately. The coin taught me that friendship is largely theatrical performance designed to conceal natural competitive instincts. People smile warmly while calculating whether their friends are advancing faster than they are. They offer congratulations on others' successes while privately resenting those achievements. They provide support and advice while secretly hoping it won't be too effective. I observed this dynamic most clearly in political circles, where men who dined together regularly and spoke of eternal friendship would immediately betray each other when opportunities arose. They maintained elaborate social rituals of camaraderie while simultaneously gathering information that could be used against their companions if circumstances required. The most painful lesson involved learning that emotional intimacy often increases rather than decreases the likelihood of betrayal. Close friends know exactly which attacks will cause the most damage. They understand your fears, weaknesses, and secrets. When they decide you've become an obstacle to their advancement, they possess the knowledge necessary to destroy you effectively. This insight initially filled me with cynicism, but eventually led to a more sophisticated understanding of human relationships. I learned that accepting the competitive undercurrents in friendship doesn't eliminate the possibility of genuine affection. It simply removes dangerous naivety about human nature. The two-faced coin revealed why successful people maintain friendly relationships without dangerous vulnerability. They enjoy companionship and mutual assistance while protecting themselves from the inevitable moments when friends become competitors. They share experiences and provide support without revealing information that could be used against them. I discovered that the healthiest friendships acknowledge their conditional nature rather than pretending to be unconditional. Friends who admit they're competing with each other can maintain respect and affection while being realistic about their relationship's limits. They can celebrate each other's successes genuinely because they're not pretending that self doesn't exist. The coin taught me to distinguish between social friendship and dangerous trust. Social friendship involves enjoying others' company, sharing experiences, and providing mutual assistance within reasonable limits. Dangerous trust involves making yourself vulnerable to people whose interests may conflict with yours in the future. Understanding friendships. Performative aspects also improved my ability to navigate social situations effectively. I learned to participate in the theater of friendship without being deceived by it. I could maintain warm relationships while protecting myself from the competitive dynamics that inevitably emerge when people spend time together. Most importantly, the two-faced coin taught me that recognizing friendship's limitations doesn't require becoming unfriendly or antisocial. It simply requires understanding that human relationships operate on multiple levels simultaneously, and that wisdom involves managing all those levels appropriately rather than pretending they don't exist. The crown of thorns made from gold that I commissioned from a Florentine artisan represents the paradox of power. It attracts people with promises of glory while inevitably transforming them through its burdens and temptations. This ornate piece, beautiful from a distance but painful to wear, symbolizes how authority changes, even well-intentioned, people by forcing them to make calculations that would have been unthinkable in their powerless days. Through my observations of countless leaders, I discovered that power doesn't corrupt character so much as it reveals character by creating circumstances where moral calculations become unavoidable. The village baker who seems virtuous while managing his small shop might prove ruthless when given authority over an entire city's food supply. Power exposes who people really are when stakes become significant. I watched men I had known as idealistic reformers become pragmatic autocrats once they gained office. They didn't suddenly develop evil intentions, they simply discovered that maintaining power required compromises they hadn't anticipated when seeking it. The gap between what they had promised and what they could deliver forced them to choose between effectiveness and purity. The golden crown taught me that power creates isolation that fundamentally changes how leaders view other people. When you control others' fates, you cannot maintain normal relationships with them. Everyone becomes either a threat to be managed or a tool to be used. The emotional distance necessary for making difficult decisions gradually becomes permanent psychological separation. I observed how power transforms moral reasoning by making consequences more important than principles. A powerless person can afford to be absolutely honest because the stakes are low. A powerful person must weigh the effects of honesty against the potential harm to those under their authority. Sometimes lying serves more people better than truth-telling. The crown revealed why good people often become harsh rulers. They discover that mercy toward enemies encourages more enemies to emerge. They learn that fairness to everyone pleases no one completely. They find that popular decisions often produce terrible long-term consequences, while unpopular decisions sometimes serve the greater good. Power also corrupts by creating addictive, psychological rewards that are difficult to abandon once experienced. The ability to make things happen, to see your vision implemented, to have others defer to your judgment, these satisfactions become necessary for self-esteem. Leaders who lose power often struggle more with psychological withdrawal than with practical consequences. I learned that power's most subtle corruption involves the gradual shift from serving others to expecting others to serve you. Leaders begin believing their own propaganda about being indispensable. They start interpreting opposition as ingratitude rather than legitimate disagreement. They become convinced that their personal interests align perfectly with the public good. The golden thorns reminded me that power inevitably creates enemies who must be managed or eliminated. Every decision benefits some people while harming others. Every policy creates winners and losers. Leaders must choose between being loved by everyone and being effective for anyone. The thorns represent the painful choices that power makes unavoidable. Understanding power's corrupting effects doesn't mean avoiding authority when it's offered or needed. Instead, It means accepting that wielding power requires moral compromises and psychological changes that will make you different from who you were before. The Crown of Thorns teaches that power should be accepted with full awareness of its costs. The most important insight was that power reveals the impossibility of moral purity in positions of authority. Every leader must sometimes choose between competing goods or accept lesser evils to prevent greater ones. The Crown of Thorns represents the painful wisdom that effectiveness often requires sacrificing innocence. This understanding allowed me to evaluate leaders more fairly by judging their results rather than their methods. I learned to distinguish between corruption that serves the leader's interests and compromises that serve the greater good. Even when both appear similar from the outside, the mirror with hidden compartments that sits in my study represents the sophisticated art of managing information, revealing what serves your purposes while concealing what could harm them. This ingenious device appears to be a simple looking glass, but contains secret spaces for storing sensitive documents. It embodies the principle that successful navigation of human society requires mastering the strategic disclosure and concealment of truth through years of diplomatic and political experience. I learned that absolute honesty is often a form of cruelty that serves the speaker's ego more than the listener's welfare. The person who tells dying patients they have no hope, or informs struggling friends that their dreams are unrealistic, may feel virtuous about their honesty while causing unnecessary pain without providing corresponding benefit. The mirror taught me to distinguish between malicious deception designed to exploit others and protective discretion, designed to preserve relationships and opportunities. Malicious deception involves lying to gain unfair advantages or harm innocent people. Protective discretion involves withholding information that would serve no constructive purpose while potentially causing significant damage. I discovered that social relationships depend on mutual agreements to maintain certain illusions and avoid certain truths. People prefer not to know about their friends' private criticisms, their spouse's fleeting attractions to others, or their children's minor transgressions. Insisting on complete transparency in such matters destroys relationships without improving them. The hidden compartments revealed why successful diplomats and leaders master the art of speaking truthfully while not revealing everything they know. They answer questions accurately while controlling which questions get asked. They provide information that serves constructive purposes while protecting details that could cause unnecessary conflict or misunderstanding. I learned that timing affects the moral value of truth-telling as much as content does. Information that would be helpful when people are ready to hear it becomes harmful when delivered prematurely. A truth that motivates positive change when shared at the right moment can cause despair and paralysis when shared too early or too late. The mirror showed me how wise people protect others from truths they're not prepared to handle, while gradually preparing them for revelations that will eventually be necessary. This approach serves compassion rather than deception, by ensuring that difficult truths are delivered in ways that maximize benefit and minimize harm. Understanding necessary deception also taught me to evaluate others' honesty more accurately. When someone shares damaging information about themselves or others, I learned to ask whether this honesty serves any constructive purpose or merely demonstrates their lack of social intelligence and consideration for others. That the hidden compartments represented the importance of maintaining private spaces in relationships where you can store thoughts, feelings, and experiences that don't need to be shared immediately or completely. This privacy protects relationships from the damage that total transparency often causes. I discovered that the most trustworthy people are often those who demonstrate discretion rather than those who pride themselves on brutal honesty. People who can keep secrets, who think before speaking, and who consider the effects of their words on others prove themselves capable of the emotional intelligence that lasting relationships require. The mirror taught me that effective communication involves revealing yourself strategically rather than completely. Share enough truth to build genuine connections while protecting information that could be used against you or that serves no constructive purpose. This approach builds trust through demonstrated reliability rather than emotional vulnerability. Most importantly, I learned that maintaining certain boundaries around truth creates space for relationships to develop naturally rather than being destroyed by premature or unnecessary revelations. The art of necessary deception protects the conditions that allow honesty to flourish when appropriate. The hunter's tracking guide that became my constant companion during exile taught me to read the subtle signs of human intention and motivation with the same precision that hunters use to follow game through forests. This weathered manual, filled with observations about animal behavior patterns, revealed that humans leave equally clear tracks for those who know how to interpret them. The art of reading people begins with understanding that everyone constantly reveals their true thoughts through unconscious behaviors that contradict their spoken words. A person claiming loyalty while avoiding eye contact, shifting nervously, or finding excuses to delay commitments is broadcasting their intentions as clearly as if they had announced their planned betrayal. I learned to observe patterns of behavior over time rather than focusing on individual incidents that might be misleading. Someone who consistently arrives late to meetings isn't simply disorganized. They're demonstrating that your time has less value than theirs. Someone who frequently cancels plans isn't merely busy. They're showing that your relationship ranks low among their priorities. The tracking guide taught me that changes in established patterns reveal shifting loyalties and intentions before people become conscious of these changes themselves. When a reliable ally begins responding slowly to messages, offering vague commitments, or finding reasons to avoid private conversations, they're unconsciously preparing for separation or betrayal. I discovered that people reveal their true opinions through seemingly casual comments and offhand remarks more accurately than through formal statements. The jokes someone tells, the complaints they share, and the examples they choose when making points all expose their genuine attitudes beneath their diplomatic presentations. Physical positioning and body language provide constant information about people's comfort levels and hidden agendas. Someone who claims to support your proposal while positioning themselves near the exit, checking the time frequently, or creating physical barriers with papers or objects is revealing their true opinion through their unconscious choices. The guide showed me how to recognize the difference between temporary stress and fundamental character shifts. Temporary stress affects behavior inconsistently. Someone might be irritable one day and normal the next. Character shifts affect behavior patterns. Someone gradually becomes more secretive, more critical, or more distant over time. I learned to pay attention to whom people choose to spend time with when they have options. Someone who claims you're important to them while consistently choosing other companions for social activities is revealing their true preferences. People allocate their most valuable resource time according to their actual priorities rather than their stated ones. The tracking manual taught me that emotional reactions often reveal more than rational responses. When someone becomes unusually defensive about seemingly minor questions, they're usually protecting larger secrets. When someone shows excessive enthusiasm for ideas they previously ignored, they're often trying to compensate for guilt about past neglect or future betrayal. Understanding these patterns allowed me to anticipate betrayals before they occurred and position myself accordingly. Instead of being shocked by sudden changes in relationships, I learned to recognize the early warning signs that preceded them. This knowledge provided protection without requiring paranoia or suspicion. The most valuable insight was learning to trust my intuitive responses to people while also analyzing the specific behaviors that triggered those responses. When someone made me feel uncomfortable, I learned to identify exactly what they were doing that created that feeling, usually some combination of inconsistencies between their words and actions. Reading the unspoken also revealed when people were genuinely trustworthy and reliable. Consistent patterns of honesty, reliability, and consideration over time provided evidence of character that single impressive gestures couldn't match. The tracking guide taught me to distinguish between temporary performance and sustainable character. The fortress key that hangs on my wall represents the principle of building relationships that can withstand human nature's darker aspects while still allowing for genuine connection and mutual benefit. This iron key, worn smooth by generations of use, symbolizes how to create trust that is strategic rather than naive, protective rather than vulnerable, and realistic rather than idealistic. Through my painful education in human nature, I learned that the alternative to naive trust isn't cynical isolation, it's calculated trust based on clear understanding of incentives, accountability, and mutual interests. This approach allows for meaningful relationships, while protecting against the inevitable moments when self-interest overcomes sentiment. The fortress key taught me that strong relationships require structural foundations rather than relying solely on emotional bonds. Just as a fortress protects its inhabitants through walls and gates, rather than depending on enemies' goodwill, successful relationships need systems that make betrayal costly and cooperation profitable for all parties involved. Discovered that calculated trust begins with honestly assessing what motivates each person in a relationship. Instead of assuming others share your values or priorities, observe what they actually pursue through their choices and actions. Build relationships around shared interests rather than assumed virtues, creating situations where everyone benefits. From maintaining the connection, the key represents the importance of graduated trust that increases slowly based on demonstrated reliability rather than declared intentions. Start relationships with small commitments and limited vulnerability. Increase trust incrementally as people prove themselves through consistent behavior over time. This approach protects you from major betrayals while identifying genuinely trustworthy individuals. I learned to create accountability systems that make agreements self-enforcing rather than depending on honor or affection. Structure arrangements so that breaking commitments costs more than keeping them. Make mutual benefit obvious and immediate rather than abstract and delayed. Design relationships so that betrayal damages the betrayer's interests as much as the victim's. The fortress key showed me how to maintain emotional connection while protecting practical interests. Enjoy people's company and provide genuine assistance, while avoiding dangerous dependency or excessive vulnerability. Share experiences and offer support within limits that preserve your autonomy and security if circumstances change. Understanding calculated trust also taught me to recognize and value genuinely trustworthy people when I encountered them. People who consistently honor commitments even when it's inconvenient, who maintain confidences even when sharing them would be advantageous, and who provide honest feedback even when it's unwelcome, demonstrate character that can support deeper trust over time. The key represented the principle of reciprocal vulnerability, gradually sharing risks and confidences with people who demonstrate equivalent openness. This approach builds genuine intimacy based on mutual evidence of trustworthiness, rather than one-sided exposure that creates dangerous imbalances. I discovered that calculated trust actually enables more authentic relationships than naive trust, because it removes the pressure to maintain unrealistic expectations. When people know you understand their limitations and self-interested motivations, they can be more honest about their capabilities and intentions rather than performing impossible virtue. The fortress key taught me that protection and connection aren't opposites, They're complementary elements of sustainable relationships. Strong boundaries make genuine intimacy safer by ensuring that relationships can survive temporary conflicts of interest or changes in circumstances. Most importantly, I learned that calculated trust honors human dignity by acknowledging people's complexity rather than demanding they be either angels or demons. It accepts that everyone has both selfish and generous impulses, creating space for the generous impulses to flourish while protecting against the selfish ones. This approach to relationships proved more satisfying and durable than either naive trust or cynical isolation. The fortress key represents the wisdom of building connections that can withstand reality rather than depending on fantasy. The modern business card, stained with Renaissance ink, that sits on my desk, bridges 5 centuries of human experience, proving that the fundamental patterns of human nature I observed in Italian courts operate identically in today's offices, digital networks, and social relationships. This artifact represents the timeless applicability of insights about human behavior that transcend technological and cultural changes. In today's workplace, the same dynamics I witnessed in Renaissance politics play out with remarkable consistency. Colleagues form alliances based on mutual advancement opportunities rather than genuine friendship. They share information strategically while withholding details that might benefit competitors. They perform loyalty to supervisors while privately planning career moves that serve their individual interests. The modern equivalent of my diplomatic experiences occurs in corporate meetings, where participants say what they think others want to hear rather than expressing genuine opinions. They use carefully crafted language that appears supportive while preserving options to distance themselves if projects fail. They make commitments that sound definitive, but contain subtle qualifications that provide escape routes. Understanding human nature's consistency allows you to navigate workplace politics more effectively than colleagues who believe in organizational mythology about teamwork and shared purpose. Recognize that promotions go to people who manage relationships strategically rather than those who simply perform their assigned tasks competently. Success requires mastering the appearance of collaboration while protecting your individual interests. Social media has created new platforms for the same performative behaviors I observed in Renaissance courts. People craft online personas that emphasize their virtues while concealing their struggles and failures. They provide support and encouragement publicly while privately comparing their achievements to others and feeling competitive resentment about friends' successes. The business card, stained with ancient ink, represents how digital communication enables more sophisticated versions of the strategic information management I learned from diplomatic correspondence. People can now control their image presentation with unprecedented precision, sharing only flattering photos, successful moments, and positive opinions, while hiding everything that might diminish their social status in personal relationships. The same patterns of gratitude and ingratitude continue operating regardless of modern values that emphasize emotional openness and authentic connection. People still resent those who help them in ways that create dependency or highlight their inadequacies. They still distance themselves from benefactors when independence becomes possible. Understanding these patterns helps you structure modern relationships more successfully. Offer assistance in ways that allow others to maintain dignity and claim credit for their achievements. Avoid creating obligation or dependency that will eventually breed resentment. Design your generosity to strengthen rather than threaten others' self-esteem. The principles of fear and love that I observed in political leadership apply directly to management and parenting in contemporary contexts. Effective leaders establish clear consequences for unacceptable behavior, while simultaneously providing rewards and recognition for good performance. They inspire affection through competence and fairness, while maintaining credible authority through consistent enforcement of boundaries. Modern technology has amplified the importance of reputation management that was crucial in my era. Just as Renaissance leaders needed to control information about their activities to maintain authority, contemporary professionals must manage their digital footprints and online presence to protect their careers and relationships. The stained business card teaches that success in any era requires understanding what motivates people beneath their stated values and official commitments. Whether you're negotiating contracts, building teams, or maintaining friendships, the fundamental dynamics remain constant. People act according to their perceived interests, while maintaining socially acceptable explanations for their behavior. Most importantly, these timeless insights provide practical advantages in contemporary life. When you understand that human nature hasn't changed, you can predict behaviors more accurately, structure relationships more effectively, and protect yourself from disappointments that surprise those who believe in human moral progress. The ancient truth serves modern needs with remarkable precision. The clear crystal that replaced my rose-colored glasses sits prominently in my study, representing the profound liberation that comes from seeing humanity as it truly exists, rather than as we wish it were. This transformation from idealistic blindness to realistic vision has been the most valuable achievement of my life, more important than any political position I held or any book I wrote. The freedom of clear sight begins with the relief of abandoning impossible expectations. When you stop expecting gratitude for your generosity, you can help others without disappointment. When you stop expecting loyalty to override self-interest, you can enjoy relationships without betrayal, trauma. When you stop expecting virtue to be rewarded automatically, you can pursue excellence for its own sake rather than for external validation. This crystal clarity has taught me that accepting human nature doesn't require becoming cruel or cynical. It requires becoming wise and strategic. Understanding that people act according to their interests allows you to design situations where their interests align with yours. Recognizing the competitive elements in friendship allows you to enjoy companionship while protecting yourself from its dangers. The clearest vision reveals that human nature's darker aspects serve important functions in social organization and individual survival. Self-interest motivates innovation and hard work. Competition drives improvement and progress. The capacity for betrayal prevents the formation of rigid social structures that might become oppressive. What appears negative from one perspective serves necessary purposes from another. I have learned that the most authentic relationships emerge when people acknowledge their limitations honestly rather than performing impossible virtue. When friends admit they sometimes feel envious of each other's success, they can address those feelings constructively rather than allowing them to poison the relationship unconsciously. When leaders acknowledge their self-interested motivations, they can govern more effectively than those who pretend to be pure public servants. The crystal represents the paradox that accepting human selfishness enables more genuine generosity. When you help others because it serves your values or interests, rather than because you expect gratitude, your assistance becomes truly beneficial rather than emotionally manipulative. When you form relationships based on mutual benefit rather than unconditional love, those relationships can survive changes in circumstances. Clear sight has shown me that the alternative to naive trust isn't cynical isolation, it's sophisticated engagement based on realistic assessment of risks and benefits. You can enjoy deep connections with others while maintaining appropriate boundaries. You can provide significant assistance while protecting yourself from exploitation. You can love people while understanding their limitations. The most liberating discovery has been that human nature's consistency makes life more predictable and manageable rather than more depressing. When you understand the patterns that drive behavior, You can anticipate challenges before they develop and structure situations to minimize conflicts. You can build systems that work with human nature rather than against it. This clear crystal has taught me that wisdom begins with accepting reality rather than trying to reform it according to idealistic visions. The world operates according to discoverable principles that can be understood and used constructively. Fighting against these principles leads to frustration and failure. Working with them leads to effectiveness and satisfaction. My final insight is that seeing humanity clearly increases rather than decreases compassion. When you understand that selfishness and betrayal stem from universal psychological drives rather than personal malice, you can forgive more easily while protecting yourself more effectively. You can love people for what they actually are, rather than resenting them for failing to meet impossible standards. The liberation of clear sight has given me peace with the human condition and confidence in navigating its complexities. This crystal represents the greatest gift I can offer, the courage to see truth and the wisdom to live successfully within it.